What happened to you?
Did someone call for me? You're what's happened to me.
What are you talking about?
You know I can make you go away forever. No, don't take the pills. They have awful side effects. And besides...
The story's suggestion of a Three Musketeers friendship among Shyla, Alison, and Bree, whatever comedic lightness that phrase carries, actually gestures towards something meaningful. The possibility of chosen family forming out of what began as active harm, a dynamic not uncommon in queer community, where sometimes the people who eventually become closest, most trusted friends, were not always safe presences from the very beginning, and stories willing to sit with this uncomfortable but realistic possibility that reconciliation after real harm is difficult, gradual, and never fully guaranteed but not impossible either, offer something more valuable than simpler narratives of either permanent estrangement or instant, uncomplicated forgiveness, because they honor the actual complexity of how trust gets rebuilt. Slowly, skeptically, with real vigilance intact even as the door is cautiously opened, exactly as Shyla is doing in this moment, inviting Alison in while still working to keep her own hard-won guardedness in check rather than either abandoning it entirely or letting it make the choice for her. Shyla. Audible argument with herself, witnessed by two startled friends who have no framework for understanding what they're seeing, deserves to be read first and foremost as a portrait of a person losing a battle she has been fighting quietly for a long time, and the significance of this moment lies less in its surface strangeness, a girl seemingly talking to thin air, and more in what it reveals about the architecture of Shyla's inner life, since the tentative reconciliation depicted in the previous chapter of her story, because the growth she seemed to be reaching toward, the willingness to let her guard down, to question her own instinct toward cruelty, to actually consider that Alison's apology might be sincere, has clearly not resolved into permanent change but instead ignited an ongoing internal war. And this is worth sitting with honestly, rather than treating as a disappointing reversal, because real psychological change rarely arrives as a single clean turning point. It tends instead to look exactly like this. A hard-won insight followed by relapse, followed by renewed struggle. The good and the wounded, defensive parts of a person locked in genuine, unresolved combat rather than one simply and permanently defeating the other. The specific content of Shyla's plea, that she is trying to be a good person, that bullying other girls to get what she wants is something she wants to stop doing, deserves to be taken with real seriousness as evidence that the growth from before wasn't performance, that some genuine part of her has actually internalized a desire to be different, to no longer be defined by the cruelty that has organized her social life and her sense of power for so long. And the fact that this better impulse is losing ground in this particular scene doesn't erase its reality. It simply demonstrates how difficult it actually is to dismantle a defense mechanism once it has become deeply woven into how a person survives and navigates her world, especially when that mechanism has, however destructively, actually worked for her in the past, securing her social position, her sense of control, her protection from ever being the vulnerable one again. Bree and Alison's position, watching their friend in visible internal crisis, deserves to be centered as its own significant emotional thread, because their concern and confusion represent a genuinely difficult question many people face when someone they care about begins exhibiting behavior they don't understand and can't easily categorize. The question of how much loyalty is actually owed to a friend whose worst impulses seem to be gaining ground, and whether staying close during this kind of visible unraveling constitutes real care or simply enables continued harm. And this is where their own judgment, their own agency as separate people with their own values, becomes the true test of the scene, because Shyla's more sinister half attempting to recruit them as partners in crime is not simply a plot device moving the story toward mischief. It's a direct challenge to Bree and Alison's own developing sense of self, asking them to decide, in real time, whether their friendship with Shyla requires them to go along with whatever she asks of them, or whether genuine friendship sometimes means refusing to participate in someone's worst impulses even at the risk of that person's anger or rejection. This tension between loyalty to a friend and loyalty to your own values resonates deeply within queer community dynamics specifically, because chosen family and close friendship often carry an implicit, unspoken expectation of solidarity, the sense that you show up for your people no matter what. And this expectation, while often a genuine source of strength and protection for people who have had to build support systems outside traditional family structures, can also curdle into something less healthy if it requires suppressing your own judgment or complicity in harm simply to preserve group cohesion. And Bree and Alison's task in this moment, deciding whether to resist Shyla's manipulation or go along with it to keep the peace, mirrors a genuinely difficult calculation many people navigate within tight-knit friend groups, particularly groups formed partly around shared marginalization or shared history of being outsiders, where the fear of losing hard-won belonging can make it enormously difficult to hold a friend accountable, even when accountability is exactly what the relationship needs. If Shyla's more manipulative side does succeed, even temporarily, in drawing her friends into schemes they wouldn't otherwise choose, this deserves to be read honestly as a real failure with real consequences, not softened or excused by the underlying sympathy the story has built for Shyla's woundedness, because sympathy for why someone behaves destructively is not the same as absolution for the behavior itself, and Bree and Alison's own moral compromise, if they do go along with something they know is wrong specifically because Shyla asks them to, represents a genuine loss for both of them, a chipping away at their own integrity in service of a friendship dynamic that has, at least in this moment, become unbalanced and unhealthy, prioritizing Shyla's demands over their own better judgment. But there is real narrative value in imagining this chapter as the low point specifically, the moment where the cost of unconditional loyalty becomes clear enough that it can't be ignored any longer. Because a friendship that survives this kind of test, that eventually finds its way to actual honesty rather than continued enabling, becomes considerably stronger and more trustworthy than one that simply avoided ever facing the question. And if Bree and Alison do go along with Shyla's scheme in this particular moment, the value of the story lies in what happens next. Whether they're able to recognize afterward that going along was a mistake, whether they find the courage to name that mistake honestly to Shyla and to themselves rather than simply repeating the pattern indefinitely, and whether Shyla's better half, the part of her that started the scene by pleading to be good, eventually gets the chance to reassert itself with her friends' honest support rather than their complicity. What ultimately makes this material worth taking seriously, even in its darker turn, is what it reveals about the ongoing, non-linear nature of real change, both for Shyla individually and for the friendships around her, because genuine transformation rarely follows a single clean arc from cruelty to kindness. It tends instead to loop back on itself, testing everyone involved repeatedly, asking Shyla to keep choosing her better impulses even after she's already relapsed once, and asking Bree and Alison to keep deciding, scene after scene, what actual care for their friend requires, whether that care sometimes means saying no, refusing complicity, holding a boundary even when doing so risks the relationship. Because friendship built on honest boundaries, however uncomfortable to establish, ultimately proves far more durable and far more valuable than friendship built on the fear of ever disappointing someone whose worst impulses are, even briefly, in control.